Hey guys, and welcome to the Kurima Podcast, where we talk about business, finance, entrepreneurship, and real estate. I'm your host, Jason Kurima, and I have a very special guest today, Jack Williams. Jack, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Jack is the president of Wintech, and then he's on a bunch of different boards as well. And so I'm excited that you're here, and let's just kind of dive into your story and how you got started.
Sure, yeah. So my story really starts in sixth grade. I went over to a friend's house, and he had this movie that was from Paramount Pictures called Top Gun. Yeah. And once I watched that movie, I was like, that is what I want to do. So really from sixth grade until, graduated high school, that was kind of my goal was, all right, what do I need to do to get to go do that? And so, found out I need to go get commissioned in the Navy and the process for all that. And about 11th grade, I started dating my now wife in high school. And all of a sudden it hit me that 6 months on a boat's a long time. So do I really want to be on the Navy side? So then I got a quick answer is, hey, the Air Force, you don't have to be on the boat. So I switched my goal to going on to the Air Force. And that's really going into college. I wanted to find a major that looked good on the flight school application. And they said engineering is probably the best bet. And so I majored in engineering and came out on the other side and got commissioned and then went into the Air Force. And I was in the Air Force for 7 years. Ended up flying the F-15, so I achieved my first goal and really absolutely loved it. But one of the things I told my wife, I was like, anytime that this lifestyle gets to, because it is a very tough lifestyle on the families.
I bet.
And I would say it's almost harder on the families than it is the individual. Because, I'm over there doing a mission and something I signed up for and that really is, something I love, where the families now, back home, she's taking care of not only her duties, kind of as the mother, but she's also picking up the duties that I'm not there to do. So it's pretty stressful on her. And she was supportive, but after the second deployment, so I deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. And after Iraq, she was like, hey, I think this is, I don't want to continue down this lifestyle. And so at that point, I decided, all right, I've got an engineering degree and kind of looked for what options I had. And I thought, one of the best pieces of advice that I received in college was from a professor, and he said, unless you just truly love engineering and you love crunching numbers and you want to be doing that the rest of your life, go get an MBA. He said that makes you a much more rounded individual. So I took that advice, and as I was finishing up in the Air Force, I went ahead and got an MBA, and then once we got out, we knew we wanted to go back to Northwest Arkansas because we went to college there. We absolutely loved that area. And there was a company called Conair that was hiring, and they were looking for an application engineer. I didn't know anything about fenestration. I didn't know anything about the company itself, so started doing some research and ended up going to work for them for a couple of years. While I was there, a headhunter had found me about a company in Missouri, Monette, Missouri, called EFCO. And they were actually looking at the time for an engineer, but as I came up and interviewed with them, and they offered me an engineering manager position, and that was kind of the first step up. And I'd been out about 2 years when that happened, and so I moved to didn't move. I commuted for the first 9 months, and then eventually moved up to Monette as the engineering manager. About a year after I started with EFCO, Pella purchased EFCO. And that was, for me, that was a pretty good thing because when Pella came in, Pella has some very good leadership training programs. They also gave me an opportunity to lead multiple areas of the business. So they had me go over to the plant manager side, got a chance to lead the sales team, the marketing team, front-end operations team. And so really broad experience. And so that ended up being very good. And I did that I think I was there right at about 11 years. And at that point, Pella sold to Apogee. And Apogee was a public company. They're a good company, so I didn't necessarily have anything against Apogee other than I didn't really want to work for a public company. And about the same time, I had some friends reaching out to me from a company across the street, Wintech, that was they were an ESOP, and they were needing some help on the operations side. So they asked me if I'd come over as the vice president of operations. I did that in 2017, and then 2018 became the president. So that's kind of my story of how I got to where I am today.
That's awesome. So what are a few goals that you're trying to achieve right now with maybe within the company and then personally as well?
Yeah, so within the company's probably the easiest to fire off. So we set out on a plan to achieve 400 million, be a $400 million company by 2035. And within that plan, we've got three separate growth channels, one of them being the existing WinTech as it is today, a 10% growth. The other is mergers and acquisitions, so every 2 to 3 years, merger or acquisition, and then expecting that company to grow at 10% rate. And then we've got a concept called Blue Ocean, which is really market disruptors or entries into new market. Okay. So through those three channels, and then we kind of break that down. So we go from a 2035 plan to a 5-year plan. Our current 5-year plan ends in 2026, and it's really subsets of where we need to be and things that we need to accomplish in order to hit that 2035 plan. And then our 5-year plan breaks down into our annual plan, and that's what drives our budget and things along those lines.
So are you guys currently on track to hit all those goals, or?
We actually are. So we've been ahead of plan. One thing that really set us back was on the acquisition side, COVID. And so when we stopped traveling and going to visit companies, and that really set us back a couple of years on the acquisition piece. We are actually in the final stages of an acquisition now that pretty much keeps us back on track once this one's accomplished, assuming that it goes through. So feeling pretty good about getting back on track with that piece, but outside of that, we're on track for our plan.
Yeah. And you guys, for the audience that doesn't know, so you guys manufacture windows. Usually it's commercial, right?
We do both commercial and residential.
Okay.
So our residential up until about a year ago was a very niche market in that we made basement windows and really for concrete contractors. So our customers are heavy in the Denver area and Chicago and up near Maryland. In the past year, we actually launched an above grade window. So now we're selling, to ride out lumber and some of the lumber yards going into a traditional above grade housing.
Yeah. And then I saw you guys also do like the P-TAC.
Yep.
The whatever, I can't think of what
P-TAC louvers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do those and we do HVAC doors. So the P-TAC louvers, if you think of a hotel room where you've got the two windows and then the little air conditioner unit below, the back side of that has to be vented, and that's basically our louvers that covers those. So we're heavy in the hospitality industry with that product.
Okay. So how does WinTech make its decisions on what products they want to start manufacturing and offer?
Typically, we have a product planning process, and we look at product life cycle curves and then get feedback from the market, because you're always getting feedback on different products from customers of, hey, we need this, or we're seeing this, or we could use this. And so what we have to do is basically take a look at the requests coming in and then really start to understand what can we produce profitably. So we can make just about anything from a window standpoint, but if it's going to be, we're making one or two each run, that those changeovers, that impacts manufacturing greatly. Whereas if it's a product that is a very standardized size and now you're making 300 in a run, that's obviously more attractive. So that's kind of our first test is, all right, does this make sense from a manufacturing standpoint? That is this something in our wheelhouse that we can be good at? If that answer is yes, then obviously we start moving forward with our product planning. If that answer is no, then really we go to kind of a secondary question. Is this a need for critical customers? So we take care of our core customers, and if this is something that they've got to have for their business, then we a lot of times will move forward with that to take care of them, because the other option, if they can't get it from us, that means they've got to go source it from somewhere else. And anytime you let another supplier in the door making your same product, there's a risk there. So we always want to make sure we take care of our core customers. And then the other question we ask is there pull-through revenue associated with this? And what I mean by that, sliding glass doors are a great example. If you think of a house, you're going to have one sliding glass door per house. But depending on the house, you may have 20 windows. So if having that sliding glass door gets you a builder that's doing 1,000 starts a week or whatever the case may be, well, that's a lot of windows coming in for just having the ability to make that sliding glass door if that's something they want to have in their package.
So are you guys also in any of the big retailers? Like, do you distribute to them at all? Or
We haven't gone to the big box retailers, like a Lowe's or anything like that, mainly because their volume required, the growth would be too fast for us.
Okay.
In other words, if we go into a Lowe's and then start trying to supply them, that's going to steal volume from our core customers, and we wouldn't be able to support our customers and the larger big box at this time.
So is it it's not necessarily a conflict of interest. It's just that, like, the volume-wise, you wouldn't be able to supply for both currently, is what you're
Exactly.
saying. Okay.
And you typically find, one of the things that we've found a lot of success with is relationships. So the relationships with our customers and our vendors, those tend to be much more beneficial for both us and the customer. And the ability to have a relationship with a national chain is also much more difficult, because you're going in, you're going to talk to their buyer, and their buyer is going to line you up with 5 other companies and say, all right, what's your product and who's got the cheapest price? And they really pinch you on price. In that case, you're really just a supplier.
Yep.
And for us, we don't have 15 fully automated lines running full time and running one product. So us to compete on that level with the really large window companies at this point would be very difficult.
Okay.
And like I said, our wheelhouse is much more on the relationship piece.
Yep. So on the residential side, do you work with builders directly, or like what is your, I guess, target for that? Like, who's your target customer?
Right now, when you talk about the niche market that we talked about beforehand, the basement windows, really we sell to concrete contractors. And so they're the ones that go in and dig the basement, pour the concrete foundation.
Okay.
So our primary market there is the actual concrete contractor themselves. Getting into the above grade market, which we started about a year ago, we're selling. We've talked to some home builders directly, and what we find out is they like the ability to go to kind of a one-place dealer and get their entire house package from that location. Those typically are local lumber yards or supply yards. And so we started selling to Ride Out Lumber and some of those regional type lumber and supply yards.
Yeah. Okay. So being the president, what is a typical day look like for you?
Yeah, so, typically my day starts around 5 o'clock. First thing I do, I get up and I have kind of that first hour. I don't know if you've heard of the 5 a.m. club.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the 5 a.m. club. So
and lately I've been slacking, so I got to get back into it.
Yeah, that one's, especially that first 20 minutes of getting up and doing exercise, you can justify that one away real easy. But, yeah, I usually get up and spend about 20 minutes kind of stretching and I don't do heavy exercise first thing in the morning. It's usually a lighter exercise, a light jog, or I may drill some jiu-jitsu or something along those lines. Then kind of go through that. I do spend 20 minutes in kind of a prayer and devotional time, and then 20 minutes reading after that. Nice. So that's kind of how I start my day. And then really from there, it varies pretty widely depending on what I've got going on. With the acquisitions, a lot of my time has been spent either in phone calls or meetings or stuff regarding the acquisition with our due diligence team. But I usually get into the office about 8 o'clock, and I really try to block off the first 2 hours of the day as just office time to accomplish things that I need to get accomplished. Because what I found out is any open time on my calendar, it gets filled in with things that I'm not going to say are not important, but
not highest priority.
Not the highest priority.
Yeah.
So I always try to get the highest priority things done first thing. And I have, I've got to where I've set my staff meetings about once a month. I do have one-on-ones with each of my direct reports for an hour. And really that's to set up, my job. I always tell people, I think as a CEO, and this is, I'm stealing this from a mentor I had one time, and I thought it was a brilliant comment, and it's worked extremely well for me. My job as a CEO is to make maybe 3 or 4 really important decisions in a year. Outside of that, my job is to establish a team that can buy in and execute the vision I have and run the company day to day. Because if I'm looking at running the company day to day, then I'm not looking and thinking 3, 5, and 10 years out and positioning the company to hit the vision there. It's the, am I looking down and in or up and out?
Yeah, I love that. That's really good. So what advice would you give someone that's maybe, right out of high school or right out of college, that they really want to do big things, they want to be successful? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, the biggest one I found is to have a vision. So many people, and a vision has to be more than just I want to be something big or I want to make a lot of money. Start to think about what do you want your life to look like in 5, 10 years, and whether that's how you're working or how much free time you have or what your hobbies are, and really kind of get specific on what that is, and then you can start really aligning your activities to hit your visions. A lot of people, just kind of go through and things happen and they take whatever occurs and really don't feel like they have control. I got to go to college, so I'll go to college, and my dad was an engineer, so I guess I'll be an engineer, and just kind of drift through and let the current of life take them, as opposed to, hey, here's my vision of what I want. And the other thing that allows you to do is when you start looking at what things, when I've got to decide, I've got to cut something out, I don't have time for everything I've got going, it becomes very easy. Does this align with my vision that I have that I'm currently after or not? Yeah. And if it doesn't, it's the first thing to get cut.
Oh, that's really good. And then I also wanted to add, you can't hit a target you can't see, right? So if you're, like you mentioned, a lot of people just drift through life. They don't really have any goals that they're actively pursuing, or they always think, oh, it's a pipe dream or whatever. But if they really applied themselves and went after something, they could hit whatever it is. Like, you can do anything you set your mind to.
That's exactly right. And one of the things within the vision that I would encourage people is to make sure it's more about more than just money or more than just, prestige or any of that, because you'll always be chasing. There's never going to be enough money. There's never going to be enough prestige. And so if that's your sole focus, then you're always going to be wanting more and you'll never feel satisfied and happy. Yeah. Whereas if you think about your life's impact and what you're doing and what you're doing with the money and the prestige that you gain, because as you grow a business or whatever that case may be, you'll have access to resources. And what are you doing with that? And, how does that improve the life of the people around you? And, I think everybody has a natural understanding that when you help somebody, you feel good. Yeah. And when you help a lot of people, you start to feel really good. And so I encourage, within that vision, have a thought of, okay, how am I going to help the world around me? How do I make the world a better place?
Exactly. So you're a man of faith. How important is it for you to have business and like your Christian values and stuff? Like, do you feel like they should be separate? Do you feel like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't think they can be separate, because if they're separate, then all right, who's the real Jack? Is it the Jack that shows up at church on Sunday, or is the Jack that runs his company, Monday through Saturday? So I think the Christian values have to permeate into the workplace. Now, with that, there's obviously laws and stuff that I can't go around, and there's some discrimination things that I have to be aware of, but that doesn't mean that, I can't be very clear about where I stand. Mm-hmm. We have meals there, we'll pray before a meal. Not everybody's required to pray, and your job performance isn't judged by whether or not you pray. But again, I think people, you can't serve two masters. Yeah. So if I'm worried about serving the business world, then I'm not serving, Jesus in that case. Yep. And so I have to be true to who I am, and whatever implications come from that, so be it.
Yep, absolutely. I completely agree. So what is one of your favorite business books, or maybe a few that you would recommend?
Yeah, I do love to read business books, oddly. And probably one of my favorite, most enjoyable reads was American Icon.
Okay. I don't think I've read that one yet.
So that's the story of Alan Mulally when he came into Ford and basically saved Ford from bankruptcy. And, it's pretty interesting just how he comes in, and his ability to break the norms was probably a big factor in that, and then even reach across and work with the union. Typically union and management, have very adversarial relationships, his ability to reach across the aisle and understand their position was very good. And then the other really good story of that, I thought, is Bill Ford, who is the CEO and president and chairman of the board himself. He said, I'm not getting this done. I've got to bring somebody in for this CEO role that can get it done. So having the humility to understand that and bring in Alan Mulally, I think is an overall great story. With that, we actually have 2 books that is kind of required reading for our managers at Wintech. The first one is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. Yep. That book, when you look at it, it's a very easy read. And, of course, I'm probably biased because it's got a military slant to it. Yep. But even reading, beyond the military side, just the basic fundamentals of leadership is probably the best summary and easiest read of any book I've read. The other one we have people read is Great Game of Business. And so that one's by Jack Stack.
Yeah. SRC, right?
Tells the story of SRC, exactly. And, that concept of open book financials. And we do it because we're employee-owned. We're an ESOP. So helping people understand what it means to be an employee owner. And part of that is, understanding the company and how the company's doing and the financials. And the other part of that is when the company does well,
the employees do well.
The employees should be rewarded for that. So I think those are probably some of my favorite, or at least my favorite 3. I could go on. I mean, there's several other really good ones, but those would be the first 3 I'd recommend, I think.
Yeah. So what are some of the struggles you're encountering right now or have encountered, and how are you pushing through them, or how did you push through them?
Yeah, our biggest struggle right now is this concept of, manufacturing employee. Manufacturing is not the sexy industry to go into right now. It's not AI. It's not computers. And historically, when you look at the impression of manufacturing, it's almost been, what mistake did you make, or what bad decision did you make to end up working in a factory? It was kind of the consolation prize of poor choices. Mm-hmm. We really want to get away from that and get this concept that we've talked about of a manufacturing professional. Manufacturing can be a very good career, especially for people, in the 90s when I graduated, it was you absolutely have to go to college. You absolutely have to get a degree, and if you don't, you're not going to be able to find a job, and the world's going to pass you by. And so a lot of people went to college that really just hated education, the education system. Mm-hmm. And the truth is that people graduate every day that, can do maintenance, can do welding, can do electrician. All those things don't require a college degree and actually are much better careers than if you go get a general business and then you can't find a job with it. Yeah. And so what we want to do is really start to create a career path. So whatever that entry point may be, if you're 18 and the idea of school just makes you cringe, all right, if you come in and now you're working in the factory, what are your options for growth in a career path to, production coordinator, to production supervisor, operations manager, or if you want to come in and work at the same time and get a degree, what options do you have to go down that path? So instead of being this consolation prize, that it's actually a choice of I can go do this and work with my hands and still have a good career and provide for my family. Yeah. And then also tie in the concept of the ESOP, because the reality of it is, as the company grows, their stock position grows. And now you've got not only this opportunity for career, but now you've got a savings that if the company grows large enough, doesn't just change the trajectory of your life, it changes the trajectory of your grandkids' life. Mm-hmm. And so there's a very good career path available, and that's the message. And so we're going into the local high schools and really starting to work with the counselors and things, and certain students. We bring them into the plant, let them see and talk and ask questions, and try to, for those that aren't going to college, to give them a good option for a career.
Do you feel like it's difficult to get people to see the vision of the ESOP, or because sometimes it's difficult for people to see long term because they just want money now, or they want whatever now. So do you feel like it's been a challenge getting people to buy into that vision, or what's your thoughts?
It kind of depends on which age group that you're talking about. When you look at that I'll call it 18 to 30, absolutely. Having a long-term thought of what my life is going to be, 25 years from now, they struggle to make that connection and what the ESOP value could mean to them. And in a lot of cases, they're like, well, could we just have another $1 an hour? And you try to explain to them that, $1 an hour in a year with no overtime is $2,080. That's what you're asking for. The ESOP, people that are sitting there are ESOP that's been there 6 years have an average balance around $80,000 to $90,000. Mm-hmm. So it's a different scale, but having them connect and understand and even have value in something 5 years down the road from now as opposed to now is definitely a challenge with some of the younger generation. And that's probably not a fair statement. I would say there's older generations that have that exact same challenge. Yeah. But what happens if somebody's been there, usually once they hit that 6-year mark and they see that account balance start to grow at that rate, because it's not a linear growth, it's a logarithmic growth. Then they really start to understand, and it starts to become tangible to them of, hey, that's a significant amount of money that now I've got options to do something with. Mm-hmm. And so it's easier as they've been there longer. But that's definitely a challenge we fight.
Mm-hmm. So how did you, have you guys changed it since you started the ESOP? Or I guess I don't really understand how it works that well. I know the gist of it, but have you guys made any changes with the ESOP and tweaked it to make it better or work better or anything like that? Yeah,
so kind of the general, the way the ESOP works is when an owner sells a company to a quote-unquote ESOP, so he's selling it to the employees, and what really happens is a trust is set up that actually holds the shares in trust. And so we have a trustee, and it's a third-party trustee that oversees the shares. And so for us, we have 800,000 shares that are allocated. And so when you first start it, there's typically a loan that's paying off the initial owner. Mm-hmm. So these 800,000 shares are held in trust, and every year the company pays a little bit of that loan off. And as they pay the loan off, shares are then released and get evenly distributed to the team members based on their salary or pay for the year. Mm-hmm. And so that happens that typical process now is about a 20-year process. Back when Wintech went, they didn't understand the importance of stretching that out, and Wintech's was about a 7-year process. Mm-hmm. So anyway, all the shares our loans paid off, and our shares are fully allocated. So our employee owners have 800,000 shares. When somebody leaves, so it's a closed system. So it's not like an outside investor that wants to buy some Wintech shares can buy any. So it's closed only to the employees. As somebody leaves, the company's required to purchase their share at the current valuation. So every year we hire a third party to come in and they do a valuation. And so they look through our financials and they look through growth and everything within the company, and they assign a share price value just like we were publicly traded. Yep. And so we buy back their shares as they leave at that valuation, the most recent valuation that we have. And like I said, we do that annually. Okay. Probably the biggest change we've made, and this is going to get a little bit into the weeds, but the company was originally set up on what's called recycling of shares. So that's 100% of shares are recycled. So you buy them, and the minute you buy them, you instantly reissue them back out. Okay. And the problem, it's okay as you're a smaller company, but as you start to get larger and larger, the cash requirements vary greatly on how many people are leaving, and so you have this very unpredictable cash swing. And for us, it's $1 million to $2 million a year of stock that we're buying back. And so what you do, and that really favors people that's been there longer, because like I said, if you've been there longer, that's typically the higher paid individuals, and so that comes back in and gets distributed on salary. And so what you end up happening is, a large group retires, their shares go out, with most of them going to the people closest to retirement again, and so you get this situation where you're having to repurchase your company every 6 to 8 years. Mm-hmm. And so what we've done, and this is with the path that most ESOPs go down, is they actually say, okay, we're going to adjust it to a 10% defined contribution. And what that means is the employee is guaranteed that 10% of their salary is what's going to be bought in stock for them each year. And so what that does is in the years where not as many people retire, they're still guaranteed 10%. And when a lot of people retire, they still get their 10%, but now the company has some held back for the down years when there's not as many. And so it just smooths out and it lets the employees have a easier understanding of how much shares they'll be getting each year.
Yep. Is there, I know this might be a stupid question, but is there a way to do like an 80% ESOP and then 20% current owner?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And a lot of companies do. So, we're 100% ESOP, but if you look at SRC, I think they were close to about a 50% ESOP because, especially as you buy companies and you bring them in, you have to make the decision, do you want them to be part of the ESOP? Because if that company does something that's a high risk, so a logistics company would be a great example. You buy a logistics company and they have a tractor trailer turnover and, injure or kill somebody, that liability, if they're part of the ESOP, now puts the ESOP at risk.
Yep.
So a lot of times if you'd buy a logistics company, you would not bring them into the ESOP, and so then you'd be 80-20 or whatever that percentage would be.
So I wanted to ask you, what does believe in yourself mean to you? I use it a lot in my posts. To me, it's like it kind of ties into confidence. Like you have to believe in yourself and have the confidence in yourself to go out and do whatever it is in life that you want. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I like your definition of it. And, probably tagging on to that, it would be don't be afraid to fail. That's typically what holds people back. Or even if they do fail once, they lose that confidence in themselves. And, if you everything you read, people that start these great businesses, they failed at about 5 or 6 on the front side before they finally hit the one that took off. So
for me, it's like 10 to 12. I'm a little bit slow learning.
That's right. Well, and then, and that leads into be willing to take a risk. And, the risk is, never make it more than what you can recover from. And so, for me, if I was going to take a risk and I put my house up for mortgage and, what's my plan if that fails? Okay, well, I'm out of that house and now I got to go probably rent a house. I can recover from that. I would never take a risk so much that I couldn't recover from it. But outside of that, yeah, absolutely. Don't be afraid to fail and take a risk. And yeah, like you said, just understand that you have the ability to work smarter, not harder. That's the other thing. A lot of people talk about, well, I'm going to outwork everybody. Yeah. Well, that working hard doesn't necessarily guarantee success. It's the working smart part. And that's where continuing to learn and understand and grow and learn from your mistakes and apply, whatever I learned from this failure, it's not a failure, it's a learning opportunity. Now I'm going to apply that to the next one and keep going until you hit it.
Yeah. I like what you said about all that, but I would tweak it a little bit. So for me, like I'm very high risk on most things. So I would say, like, especially if you're younger, I would just burn the boats, like go all in for something. If you're really passionate about it, even if it puts you in kind of a financial disaster, like if you really want it, you'll figure out a way to make it work. And if not, a lot of times you can recover from it eventually. Like you can figure out a way out of it anyways. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. If I was young, single, and didn't have a family behind it, that's
it kind of depends on all the variables.
And if you ask me, what's the one thing that I could do better, it would be the burn the boats mentality. Because I always like to have an off ramp, and because of that, you don't have that. It's not you have to make it work type mentality. So I don't disagree with your criticism there.
So, Jack, tell me about your time in the Air Force. Like, what was that like? Can you give us any details on, like, maybe missions or anything?
Yeah. So, being in the Air Force it was probably one of the most enjoyable times of my life, and also one of the most difficult times, because when you start talking about once you actually deploy, the training, getting ready for combat and war is an absolute blast. Then you go to war itself and it becomes real, and that's a different story. But, my last station was out in Las Vegas at Nellis Air Force Base, and so I got to fly every day in the range north of Las Vegas, and that's where, we do red flags, and so we would participate in the big red flag exercises, and they would bring in planes from all, Great Britain would be there, Australia would be there,
Awesome.
Saudi Arabia would be there. The Army would come in and have stuff going on the ground. They have a professional, they call them OP4 or opposing force. And so they were a squadron of F-16s that were the bad guys. And so you'd go up and have this massive war game to where you're flying over the mountains and terrains and hitting targets. And that was probably the most enjoyable flying that I could possibly imagine.
That's
and,
cool.
Stories from there, and right in the middle of it, you always hear about Area 51 is kind of hey, did you see Area 51? Yeah. And there's nothing called Area 51. There is a restricted area right in the middle, and I think that's probably what leads to a lot of the folklore. It's a restricted area, and they pretty much tell you don't fly over this box. And if you do, you pretty much get sent home pretty quick. Now, all conspiracy theory aside, the reality of it is that's probably where they're doing some testing and development of programs that they don't want everybody to see. So I don't think the aliens were there or anything along those lines. It was just more of, hey, there's some secrets here that we really don't care for the whole world to know about. But yeah, we one story that was always my favorite to tell people. This was a pilot from Great Britain. His call sign was Ninja, and he was actually part of our squadron. And so he goes to red flag, and at the very beginning, you kind of start, and you got the bad guys on one side, the good guys, and the air war takes over and happens, and then you bring in and do the bombing runs behind it. Well, he's talked about, they go out the first day, and the OP4 just destroys them, wipes out their air, takes out the strikers before they get to the target, and it was just an absolute disaster. So they go plan the next day, and they decide, well, we're going to do the same thing, but not a lot of changes. So he was like, this is crazy. So in the middle of the fight, he decides he's going to hit the deck and go supersonic pretty much underneath the floor that's going on, pop up behind him and come in. So he does, and he ends up going supersonic. He says, I come back up, I'm behind the enemy, and I'm taking them out left and right, and the strike package gets through. Everybody's celebrating. I land, and I get asked to go see the commander, and I'm thinking he's going to congratulate me for what a great job I did. And he said he absolutely tore into him because, one, you can't go supersonic above it. It was not an area where you're authorized to go supersonic. He flew over a campground, and one of the campground, a guy had an $80,000 RV, and this shock wave from the sonic boom busted out all the windows.
Oh, my gosh.
And so he ended up getting sent home the very next day for that. So that was kind of the fun part of it, and then you get to the combat side. And when we deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, that shifts a lot more from, the fun, good time to really it's a job at that point. And the Air Force does a great job of programming you to think of things as a job. And so you're basically going through your checks. You're not looking out the window enjoying the fact that you're flying. You're kind of going through the steps and the things that you've been trained. And in Afghanistan, there wasn't a lot of hard targets. And at that point, we were really going after, ground positions of troops and stuff. And in most cases, it was really just to kind of keep them rattled. And because we're not, it wasn't like there was giant group masses of people you're dropping bombs in the middle of. You're just dropping bombs around, kind of almost like a airborne artillery is what we were really used for there. And they didn't have a whole lot, really to fight the air war. So that was a pretty clean mission for us. We didn't get shot at. Every once in a while they would fire off a shoulder-fired rocket or something like that, but nothing of real significance. When you go to Iraq did have some systems that could actually reach out and touch you. In fact, we had an aircraft, one of ours was shot down as we were there. Basically, it was a low ceiling, so the ceiling was about 10,000 foot, so they were having to operate beneath it, which put them in the range of some AAA, and we had one shot down there. And they would lock onto you, and they could get a couple things off. Nothing that was overly high threats, but they were definitely still threats there. And in that scenario, that's really where we became kind of support for the ground troops for the most part. So we typically take off, and we'd have a target that we were planning on hitting, but we would go hold and basically wait and make sure that we don't have troops in contact or anything that need support on the ground. If we did, we'd go support them. If not, we'd go hit our targets and then go back home. And the coolest target I had was a boat one time.
Oh wow!
And this was a nice large boat, and I couldn't wait. I thought it was going to be the coolest thing to go hit this boat and see it explode because it was parked in dock. And this was night one when we went in to start the Iraqi war. And I get up there, and right before we step to go take off and fly, I get told to hold on the target, that they're running it through JAG, the legal side, to make sure that's a legal target. And it was yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and the final answer was no. So I didn't get to go hit it. And then about a week later, they decided that it was, in fact, a legal target.
The whole time
and,
you could have taken it out.
Somebody else got to go in there and take that one out.
Dang. Well, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Has there ever been any times where you were really scared?
Yeah, there was one time in training, and then I wouldn't call it scared because it happened so fast on the actual combat. The only real close encounter I had with anything firing at me was we'd refuel, in Kuwait, and then we would push north. And so we'd just come off the tanker, and we're pushing north, and you typically get all your sensors dialed in, and because the fighting had pretty much pushed up into Baghdad. And then just out of nowhere, it was a giant, kind of glow and explosion. It looked like a firework, but you could feel the heat through the canopy. And that was just somebody on the ground had fired off a AAA pop shot, just trying to get lucky. And they got close enough to get my attention. Yeah. So that one woke me up pretty good. But probably what was more risky was one time we were in training, and we would go we called it going to the range. And so you'd have a bombing range, and you'd have these dummy bombs on board, and you'd practice various types of bombs on a target. And I was an instructor at this point, so I'm riding with a student, and then in the plane in front of us is another instructor and student. And so the student in front is the technical lead, and we're going through, and it's going to be difficult to describe without using my hands, and so I'll try not to too much. But anyway, the first runs we were doing was basically a pop release. So you'd come in low level, you'd pop up, and then roll in on the target, release, and peel off.
Okay, that's cool.
And we would do we were going to do 3 runs of that. Now, and this is at night, so we're doing night bombings at this point. And then the second is going to be what's called, we're going to laze the target. So now you do the same thing, you release, but instead of pulling off, you check off and you put your laser on the target and simulating, guiding a laser guided bomb in. Dang. Well, what happened was the lead goes through his first 3, and on his 4th one, he does the same thing, which is a pop target. We come up, and as brief, we do the laze. And so what happens is they end up pulling. So, you're always trained to kind of look out to see where you expect them. We got night vision goggles on, so I look out where I expect to see them, and they're not there. And so then I look down, but the next thing we're trained to look at is there's called an air-to-air TACAN, which just tells you how close your wingman is to you, and that's going 0.4, 0.3, 0.2. And at this point, I see the tail flash of his rudder or his stabilator fly underneath us and miss us by about 100 feet. Dang. And so because he had done a different pattern as we did our lays and he popped to pull off, he basically came right underneath us, which was a very close to a range impact. And that scared me probably more than anything. Dang. But one great lesson from that I've applied all my life. So the instructor on the front one he was a lieutenant colonel, and I was a captain at the time. And so the Air Force has this rule that's a great rule that when the door's shut in a debrief, ranks off, and you are open and honest about your feedback in that. And so I lit into this lieutenant colonel pretty heavily because he was the instructor and he was the one responsible for the jet. And because they didn't do the right thing, we were within a couple hundred feet of a major midair disaster. Yeah. And he's like, you're absolutely right. Took it. And then the other thing is once that door's open, now rings back on. So it's not like I'm out there berating him in front of everybody, but you know that. And to this day, I'll tell people when the door's shut to my office, you can tell me anything you want. Jack, I think what you're doing is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I'm going to take that, and I'm going to take that as feedback. And when we open the door, if I say, I understand, but we're still going this direction, my expectations is we open the door and we walk out. But I'd much rather have people comfortable to tell me open and honest feedback without fear of me flying off the handle, because otherwise you'll never get the truth of what somebody thinks, and you'll never get open and honest opinions.
Yeah. So what are some of the key takeaways you feel like that you learned from the military that you can apply in the business world? I'm guessing discipline's a big one, right?
Yeah, discipline's an absolute big one. And, one of the things that one of my commanders said one time that's really stuck with me, and I've actually heard it in a couple of books and other things as well, is if you want to be in the top 1%, you can't act like the 99%.
Ooh, that one's really good.
And that applies to everything,
yeah.
Right? And so, whether it's how you want to live your personal life or your business goals, or even your personal goals, if you want to continue to grow and you want to be something special, you can't be spending all your time on hanging out on social media and sleeping in late. And, you have to do things different than the other 99%, or how do you expect to be differentiated from them?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I really like that. Okay. So is there anything that you're scared to do that'll help you grow, but you haven't done it yet?
Yeah, that goes back to this concept of burn the boats. Like I said, that's probably my biggest critique when it talks about growth, is that I've always been so used to having a contingency plan or an off-ramp that if things don't go well, when I talk about believing in yourself is don't being afraid to fail and learning from your failures. Well, if you're too conservative on that off-ramp or you don't burn the boats, to your point, do you ever really fail enough to learn from it?
Ooh,
and so that's one thing that I've always been so concerned and, fear of failure, and that's driven me. But at the same time, because I've never allowed myself to fully fail, some of the lessons learned from it, even on my own advice earlier, believe in yourself, that's kind of contradictory to it when you always have some type of off-ramp or alternate way if things don't go as anticipated.
Yeah. Do you do anything like affirmations or anything? Do you believe in that?
I believe in it. I personally don't do a whole lot other than on the spiritual side. I mean, obviously the concept that I'm a child of God and sets a value and worth. I don't do specific affirmations each day, but I'll tell you, I absolutely believe in it. And I'll tie it back to, my softball days. You talk to some of the best hitting coaches in softball, and, we would go talk to the University of Tennessee's coach, University of Alabama's coach, and they would all talk about the mental aspect of hitting. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest things they talked about is, if you're telling yourself, don't strike out, don't strike out, don't strike out, well, you're going to strike out because your mind, they talk about, you can't process the negative. So your mind gets on this concept of strikeouts, and then you get so concerned about not striking out, you're not focused on, the hitting side of it, which is what you should be doing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think if, affirmations, and especially if self-confidence is an issue, or if you've got some areas that you're feeling you're weak in, I think affirmations can definitely start to benefit and drive you in the direction that you want to be. It's the concept of fake it till you make it in a lot of cases. And when people get into new positions too, this concept of imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, I think almost every leader that gets put into a position is going to have a little bit of imposter syndrome, because the questions are always going to be, am I ready for this? Am I doing what I should be doing? And in that case, I think affirmations can help greatly.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever feel like that?
And imposter syndrome?
Yeah.
Absolutely. You take a look, because there's always, I think about and how that imposter syndrome manifests itself. So you start in business, and, on the business side, your day one first job, you've got a vice president and a president that you interact with, and in your mind, there's this, I don't know if you call it larger than life, seem to have everything organized, running it. Yeah. And then fast forward to, 10, 15 years later, whatever the case is, now you're there. And man, do I have it completely under control? Do I have the command presence that they showed? Am I here because I just got lucky? Have I done the right things? So yeah, I think that's imposter syndrome is very real. Yeah. And the way I combat it is I assume that I'm right. I assume I'm not prepared and I'm not ready. So now I need to go, is it read, is it study, is it go learn something else? And so constantly learning to make sure that I get to the point where I need to be. Yeah. And as I continue to grow, the next step, I'm going to be like, man, I'm not ready for this. I need to continue to grow.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that. Another question I had for you is, so there's a concept out there that if your employees need someone to like and someone to hate. So typically the face of the company is the person that everyone likes. And then you have someone that can do like the dirty work, like the firing and stuff like that. What is your take on that? I don't know how you guys structure it in your company.
Yeah. We don't structure with kind of the good guy, bad guy. A lot of times I think people can kind of see through it, and especially, our concept is you want to build trust with the employee. And trust starts with open and honest conversations. And I think a lot of times if somebody is not performing well, instead of thinking of it as, the black hat or coming on and doing the firing or the discipline, I think it's an open conversation and you don't have to yell, you don't have to jump up and scream. It can be simple as, hey, here's the expectations we have for you. Right now I don't feel like you're there. Usually the first question, and this kind of goes to the extreme ownership, is there anything you need from me or what are your thoughts? And really let them start to talk about, because if I say all these things of, you're showing up too late, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing this, people's natural reaction is going to be defensive. Yeah. But if I come in and say, hey, here's kind of what I think you're capable of, and I don't see you reaching that, is there something you need from me or how do you think things are going? And really let them start talking. A lot of times people are their own worst critic. And so if you lead them there, it's a lot easier conversation than you coming in with the accusational side. And this goes back to the question you asked about learning in the military. One of the things that always stuck with me was we were in officers camp in San Antonio, Texas. And so that's just think of basic, except for the guys in college, ROTC, that are going through officers. So it's 6 weeks, very similar. You're living in bunks, kind of the basic type. And we had a major was I forgot what they even called him, but he was responsible for our flight. And he comes in and, kind of sets the rules, and then you've got some students that are further in the program that kind of oversee and guide. And we had done something, I think we were supposed to be going somewhere. I can't even remember what the specifics are, but we ended up just kind of laying around on the bunks and doing some things you shouldn't be doing, but we were getting away with it until we weren't. So we got caught. And so the student leader came in, right, and he does the full metal jacket and yelling and screaming and all this stuff. And, everybody's kind of like, whatever. The major walks in, and he just kind of looks at us and then lowers his head in disappointment and walks out. That had a far more impact on me than the yelling and screaming, because to see that what his expectations and hopes for us were, and to see it, that not being met, I think that's a much more powerful message.
Yeah, I agree. So what legacy do you want to leave? Let's talk about maybe some of the things that you want to be known for, and then if there's any like material things that you want to be known for, anything like that, like for your kids or whatever that would be.
Yeah. So, I've actually got this listed. So I've got a personal vision, and part of that ends with, I want to be known as, friends and family say that I made the world a better place. And sharing the love of God. So that's kind of the broad aspect. As I start to break it down, there's a couple things that I believe specifically in that I've got targets related to. And a lot of those has to do with the charities and the boards and stuff like that. So you take a look at sex trafficking would be a good idea. So right now, I don't know much about that world, but, my vision and goal is that I become an advocate and an empowerer for the elimination of sex trafficking, and that I've been able to give, X amount of dollars to support that. And I never give out that money because I want it to be anonymous, because that's the other thing. As I give, I want to make sure that I'm giving for the right reasons.
Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing.
Exactly. So, I want to be able to support that at a financial level, and I want to be able to support that at whether it's a board member level, whether it's advocacy level, whatever that case may be. And I've got 4 of those. Being on Katie's board for the Family Advocacy Solutions is another one. The thing she's doing and the concept for, they call them bio parents, and really helping them, because I think she's attacking the source of so many problems, whether it's drug use, whether it's the working population, whatever it is. I think you get parenting lined out at a young age, and that has so many downstream ramifications. So I want to empower her to where she is a large state advocate for bio parenting and the things, and even approaching the national level. So specific levels is there as well. And so and I've got a couple others on church related. The outreach of the church and what they can do. And same thing, I've got monetary goals of what I want to be able to do for them, and support of them. And to do that, I've got to have success in other areas. And so that all kind of fits together.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how can people connect with you?
I've got a Facebook. I'll be honest, I don't check it very often, because that's one of those things that, there's some value in Facebook, but the negative side of that to me just continues to add up. I am on LinkedIn. Yep. I do check that one pretty frequently. And then easiest to check my email at Wintech. It's jwilliams@wintechinc.com.
Okay.
And I'm on that just about every day.
Perfect. And then do you have a final message for our audience?
Yeah. Have a vision for your life. That's the biggest one, is just know what you want to do. And it doesn't have to be a long-term vision, but what do you want to do in 5 years? What do you want to do in 10 years? And then start to align your activities around that. And most importantly, within your vision, have some aspect of how you want to help either people or something greater than yourself, and don't have the center of your vision be you.
Well, thank you guys for watching the Kurima Podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.